Something was wrong with Chen Yu's face. 23 people sat around the conference table that Monday morning, and every one of them had the look you'd expect. Eyes downward, shoulders pulled in, the careful stillness of people who did not want to be the next one noticed. Their boss, Joe Bapi, had been talking for 11 minutes. He had a habit of timing his anger for the start of the week, as if every working day needed to begin with everyone reminded of their position. But Chen Yu, third chair from the left, an untouched cup of cooling tea sitting in front of him, looked almost peaceful. Not brave, not defiant. He wasn't gripping the armrest or holding his face deliberately neutral the way you would if you were fighting fear. He simply looked like a man who had already made a decision and was now waiting for events to catch up with him. It didn't add up. He had more reason than anyone at that table to look afraid. 6 months of working here had been an education in what unpaid overtime actually meant in practice. Staying until 10 at night twice a week, weekends swallowed without comment, a bonus structure that had appeared clearly in the hiring contract and then, quietly and completely, in no paycheck since. 6 months of being told that loyalty and dedication would be rewarded. 6 months of the reward not appearing. Now Joe Bapi had called this specific meeting to address him. The accusation was public and clean. Chen Yu had asked, in a smaller internal meeting the week before, where the profit-sharing money had gone. Joe Bapi's response was that this question represented a fundamental failure of gratitude. That a person who truly understood what this company had given him, the gift of employment, the gift of being allowed to work here at all, would not be examining the company's financials. He used the word shameful. He used it twice, on different sentences, as if the word gained power through repetition. Chen Yu looked at the teacup, then he put both hands flat on the table and said that the profit-sharing clause was in everyone's contracts, that the money had been collected, that the room full of people currently staring at their laps knew exactly where it had gone. The room went silent in a very specific way, not empty, but held. Joe Bapi's face moved through several colors before arriving at red. He told Chen Yu he was fired. Said it with the relief of someone who had wanted to say it for months. Effective immediately. Security would take the badge. Chen Yu nodded, thanked him, picked up the teacup, took one drink, it was cold, and walked out. No one followed. No one spoke until after the door had closed. In the hallway, Chen Yu stood still and waited. A sound arrived in his mind. Not through his ears, more like a notification that bypassed them entirely, landing somewhere directly behind his eyes. And with it came words, arranged with the clean precision of a digital interface. Dismissal Challenge 1, complete. Reason, termination by employer. Reward, 10,000 yuan. Claim, a secretary walked past him carrying a stack of folders, glanced at his expression, and kept going. He claimed the reward. 10,000 yuan arrived in his personal account within the minute. He checked it twice. The system laid out the rest. It had been active since his first day at Joe Bapi's company. Dormant, watching, waiting for a legitimate dismissal. The mechanic was simple. Every time a real employer fired him, not resigned, fired, it paid a cash reward. And that reward doubled with each new success. 10,000 for the first, 20 for the second. The numbers kept going. By the 10th challenge, each successful firing would yield over 5 million yuan. By the 20th, the figures moved beyond comfortable imagining. And at the 100th successful dismissal, the system's final threshold, the prize sitting at the end of all of it was 1 trillion yuan. Chen Yu stood in the hallway for a long time. A security guard arrived to collect the badge. He handed it over, rode the elevator down 17 floors, and stepped out onto the street. The air smelled like exhaust and something frying in oil from the stall across the road. He stood on the pavement with 10,000 yuan in his account and a system running quietly in his head, and he thought about the 50,000 yuan in unpaid overtime Joe Bapi would never pay him. Then he thought, this is actually fine. The system came with rules, and he spent 2 days learning them. Resignation would void a challenge entirely. The employer had to fire him, clearly and deliberately, so the system could register a valid dismissal. Budget layoffs didn't count. Mutual separations didn't count. Every 5 successful challenges unlocked a lottery spin on a prize wheel with thousands of possible rewards. Multiplier cards, immunity cards, something called a work partner mechanic that he didn't fully understand yet. He focused on the immediate requirement. He needed a new job. He found one in 4 days, purchasing manager at a mid-sized supply firm in the Haicheng district. The boss, a compact and watchful man named Wang Shiren, had the air of someone who had been cheated badly once and had since decided to carry that experience into every subsequent human relationship. He watched Chen Yu sign the contract with an expression that suggested he was already calculating what Chen Yu might eventually steal. Chen Yu was polite, punctual, and efficient for exactly 10 days. On the 11th, he submitted a purchasing order, with numbers transposed in a pattern that looked either incompetent or suspicious, depending on how generous you were feeling. Nothing that caused actual harm, just enough to make the finance department uncomfortable and the boss furious. Wang Shiren called him in, voice flat with controlled anger, and told him to clear his desk. Dismissal challenge 2. Complete. Reward, 20,000 yuan. He walked out and took a taxi home, because he could now afford to. The third challenge was security work at a residential compound. He fell asleep in the guard booth during his shift, in a position carefully chosen for maximum visibility during the compound manager's morning walkthrough, back against the wall, head tilted, badge clearly visible. The conversation afterward was very brief. Reward, 40,000 yuan. Challenge 9 brought a better apartment, hot water that worked reliably, a building entrance that didn't smell like standing water. By challenge 12, he had cleared a debt he'd carried since his early 20s and had started keeping a small notebook, not for finances, but for firing reasons. Which ones he'd used, which window they'd been logged in, how long before he could recycle them. The system tracked reuse. A method that had already worked couldn't be repeated within a window of several future challenges. This constraint turned out to be good for him. It forced invention. The blind masseur operation was the kind of scheme that would have made news if anyone had known the full shape of it. The classified listing read, "Experienced masseur needed, vision-impaired applicants given preference." The business was called Clearsight Healing Center, which Chen Yu thought was a bold name for a shop claiming to specialize in blind therapists. He applied, arranged the necessary documentation through a cousin who owed him a favor, and arrived for his first shift as a certified vision-impaired masseur. He was not blind. Neither was anyone else who worked there. The shop charged premium rates because customers believed that vision-impaired therapists had developed heightened sensitivity, a reasonable premise, and one this business had decided to monetize without the inconvenience of actually employing blind people. The staff wore tinted glasses, moved with practiced care, and responded to sounds with a precision that took some rehearsal to get right. The manager, a heavy-set woman who introduced herself only as Director Fang, briefed Chen Yu on his first day in the flat, practical tone of someone explaining a supply chain. Chen Yu listened carefully, asked a few clarifying questions, took the tinted glasses home to practice with, though he wouldn't need them. His lunch breaks went toward researching the contact information for the District Business Conduct Inspection Unit. The team arrived on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks into his employment. Chen Yu had filed a detailed anonymous tip, including the specific observation that the shop's disability verification documents had not been submitted to the Labor Bureau, and that a review of employee records would be instructive. 2 officials with clipboards arrived at 9. By 9:45, Director Fang was in the doorway providing explanations. 3 of Chen Yu's co-workers had quietly removed their tinted glasses and were checking their phones in the back room. Director Fang found him at lunch, while the inspectors wrote notes in a van outside. She told him his position was being terminated for operational reasons she preferred not to specify. Dismissal challenge 11, complete. He left the tinted glasses on her desk on the way out. He'd never used them. By this point, he'd developed his own working method, separate from the one in his head. Research the employer, identify what was wrong, and something was usually wrong. Find the specific wrongness. Take the job, build toward a situation that forced the boss to fire him while simultaneously resolving the problem in a way that couldn't be quietly undone. This was more complicated than it sounded, and the creativity it demanded went up as his challenge count climbed, because the system's reuse rule kept narrowing his options and pushing him toward territory he hadn't tried before. He was cycling through administrative and operational roles across the Haicheng district, each one a short residency, when he applied for an administrative manager position at a mid-scale branch of the Chu family's business empire. He almost didn't. The company looked clean on the surface, professionally run, no obviously exposed wrongdoing, financials that didn't raise immediate flags. That made engineering a clean exit harder. But the reward tier he was approaching justified targeting more substantial companies, and the interview had offered him something the smaller operations hadn't: good tea, served hot. He wore the good suit he'd bought with Challenge 6's reward. Got the job. He noticed Chu Xiao on his second day, though noticed wasn't quite the right word for it. She moved through the branch office with her gaze angled slightly down, never settling on anyone's face for longer than a second, and the space around her had a particular quality. Coworkers maintained a measured gap, as if she stood inside a boundary only she could locate, and everyone else simply felt. She was the daughter of the Chu family's primary patriarch, 26 years old, and possessed of a stillness that had nothing peaceful in it. Chen Yu had no plan involving her whatsoever. His plan revised itself on a Wednesday afternoon in the 4th week. He was returning from the printing room when he caught voices from the small meeting space near the elevators, not loud, but carrying the unmistakable pressure of several people bearing down on one. Through the half-open door, Chu Xiao, 2 managers, and a member of the sales team discussing a company social event. The specific energy of the exchange was the kind Chen Yu recognized without needing to hear every sentence. Several people had decided that her discomfort with attending was both unreasonable and professionally inconvenient, and were making sure she understood this. He had sat in her position often enough to know exactly what was happening. He knocked on the doorframe, addressed Chu Xiao by name with the ease of someone expected, and told her the call she'd been waiting for had come through to the main line. There was no call. She worked this out when they reached his desk. She looked at him without saying anything. He told her she didn't need to thank him. Said it had seemed like an annoying situation. She asked why he'd helped. He told her something close to true, that he didn't enjoy watching people get cornered, that he had spent a significant portion of his own life as the person getting cornered, and that he'd gotten good at recognizing the shape of it quickly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said he was strange. He agreed, and went back to work. Something built between them over the weeks that followed, though neither of them named it. Small exchanges in the hallway, a few lunches that started accidentally and became slightly less accidental. Chu Xiao, Chen Yu discovered, had opinions, strong ones, delivered quietly, with the precision of someone who had spent years thinking about things she rarely shared. Her family's position had surrounded her with a kind of social isolation that passed itself off as status. Ordinary conversation sometimes surprised her, as if she had forgotten it was available. The evening that shifted the texture of things arrived at a business gathering downtown. Chen Yu attended as part of the company group. He was working through something from a small plate near the side wall, mentally reviewing Challenge 15's requirements, when a man in an expensive jacket appeared beside Chu Xiao and began talking with the confidence of someone who had already decided his attention was the valuable thing in the exchange, and her response to it was incidental. Chen Yu watched her go still, not peacefully. The particular stillness of someone trying to find an exit before a situation became visible. He crossed the room, stood beside her, and introduced himself to the man as her boyfriend, with the ease of someone who had simply been delayed getting across the room. He asked Chu Xiao whether she'd managed to find parking outside. The delivery was unhurried. The man reassessed his position, said pleasant things about nothing, and moved on. Chu Xiao stood quiet for 3 seconds. Then, barely above the ambient noise, she told him she had said something similar to her father a month ago, that she was already seeing someone, in order to head off a different set of family pressure entirely. She said the timing was extremely awkward. He considered that. Said it sounded like they had complementary problems. She came close to smiling. He hadn't seen her come close before. He noticed it in the way you noticed something you didn't realize you'd been waiting for. He offered to find her tea. She said yes if they had it, anything if they didn't. He spent longer than expected tracking it down, because the venue's interpretation of tea was specific and lived at one particular table near the back. When he returned, she was talking to someone else and looked slightly less like she was managing a quiet emergency. He handed over the tea. Neither of them mentioned the boyfriend arrangement again that evening, but it stayed between them like a thread neither had cut. Chen-san showed up around Challenge 13, which was past time. They'd grown up in the same village, a small farming community a few hours outside Haicheng, and Chen-san had been his closest friend since childhood and through everything after. Chen-san's family carried a martial tradition called Mad Dog Fist, which was exactly what it sounded like, and more effective in a crisis than it was graceful in an office environment. He'd been in Haicheng for months, cycling through short-term jobs at approximately the same pace as Chen Yu, but for completely different and mostly accidental reasons. He appeared at Chen Yu's apartment on a Friday evening with a sports bag and the particular exhaustion of someone 6 hours into a long bus ride. Said he'd heard from Chen Yu's mother that Chen Yu was in the city, asked if he could stay a few days. Chen Yu said yes. Put him in the second room. Ordered enough food for 3 people, because he had learned over many years that Chen-san, after a long journey, ate like a construction crew. They talked until close to 2 in the morning. Chen-san did most of the talking, about the city, about his recent jobs, about a specific and mortifying misreading of signals from a woman back in the village that he described at considerable length. He talked with great energy and no particular destination. Chen Yu listened with one part of his attention, while the other turned over the logistics of the next challenge. It was comfortable in a way that specific, particular, long-running friendships sometimes were. He didn't tell Chen-san about the system. He wasn't sure how to frame it in a way that didn't sound invented or alarming, and he wanted to think through the implications before putting words around it. What he did instead was watch. Over the next 2 weeks, what he observed was this. Chen-san moved through short-term employment with genuine effort and genuine bad luck, was loyal in a way that was almost physical. It sat in his posture, in his laugh, in the fact that he'd spent 6 hours on a bus because he'd heard Chen Yu was in Haicheng, and had a set of reflexes that made each workplace he entered considerably more interesting than employers generally preferred. Chen Yu made him an offer, called it a partnership, said the details were complicated and would be better explained once certain things were in motion, said the pay would be good. Chen-san agreed, before Chen Yu finished the sentence, with the ease of someone who had known him long enough to understand that if Chen Yu was calling something a partnership, the thinking had already been done. What Chen-san didn't know, and what the audience watching the next chapter of Chen Yu's life already understood perfectly, was that he had just agreed to become a key piece of a system he'd never been told about. His own job history, his impulsive nature, his talent for provoking dismissals through pure honest accident, were now assets in a game running in someone else's head. The bosses didn't know. The partners didn't know. Only Chen Yu knew, and only the people watching this story alongside him. And one more person was about to find out about Chen Yu. Not about the system, but about Chen Yu himself. And that person was going to be a problem. Chu Yuan was a man who had built an empire through intelligence, patience, and a deep suspicion that anyone who came near the things he valued was probably planning something unpleasant. His daughter was one of the things he valued most, and worried about most, in roughly equal measure. When an assistant reported that Chu Xiao had told someone in a family social circle that she was seeing a man who worked, apparently, as an administrative manager at one of the smaller Chu subsidiaries, Chu Yuan went quiet in the particular way that preceded careful action. He had Yao Bingguang look into it. Yao Bingguang was his driver and personal fixer, a compact and efficient man who had been with the family for 11 years and whose talent for the discreet resolution of inconvenient situations had made him genuinely indispensable. He produced a file on Chen Yu within 3 days. Age, background, family village, education, employment record. The employment record was the most interesting part. Chen Yu had worked at 11 different companies in the past 7 months and had been dismissed from every single one. Chu Yuan reviewed the file over tea. Then he told Yao Bingguang to make some calls. The instruction was simple. Identify where Chen Yu was currently employed, approach management discreetly, and communicate that certain financial considerations, arranged with appropriate delicacy, would make it worth their while to find cause for termination. This was not, in Chu Yuan's view, an unreasonable intervention. He was protecting his daughter from an obviously unstable young man who couldn't hold a job. He expected Chen Yu to grow frustrated, accept defeat, and redirect his attention elsewhere. Chen Yu, at Challenge 14, working as an operations coordinator at a logistics firm in the South District, was called into the manager's office on a Thursday and told his position was being discontinued due to restructuring. Dismissal Challenge 14. Complete. He walked out with more money in his account than the monthly salary of everyone on his former floor combined, and spent the taxi ride home working through what had just happened. The dismissal had been too smooth. No performance complaints, no paper trail, no preceding tension. Just a polite and thoroughly prepared conversation about restructuring from a company that showed no other signs of restructuring. Someone had paid for that exit. He didn't know who yet. But whoever it was had spent real money to fire him, which meant functionally, they were making him rich. He kept this thought to himself. It was too good to say out loud. Challenge 15 went the same way, from a different angle. He'd taken a position at a mid-sized media production firm, building toward a scheme that involved the company's irregular content licensing arrangements. Enough gray area to create a compliance problem if he directed the right attention at it. He'd been there 11 days and was 3 steps into the setup when the company director called him in and let him go. "Regrettable?" said the director. "New direction. These things happen." The director couldn't quite meet his eyes. Dismissal challenge 15, complete. 2 in a row, same texture. The direction the evidence pointed was clear, and the name it pointed toward took Chen Yu approximately 40 minutes of careful thinking to land on. Chu Yuan had the resources to make such a campaign frictionless, the motivation that came from being a very protective father, and the kind of managerial temperament that would treat this as a business-like solution to a personnel problem. Chen Yu called Chu Xiao that evening and asked whether her father had been making inquiries about him. The silence on her end lasted slightly too long. She said her father was aware she had mentioned being in a relationship, said he tended to look into things. Chen Yu said that explained some recent events, said he wasn't upset about it, said he wanted to speak with Chu Yuan directly when the timing allowed. Chu Xiao said the timing with her father was never exactly right, said she could arrange something. He said he'd be patient. He did not mention to her that each of Chu Yuan's interventions had deposited a sum into his account that her father would find genuinely surprising. The work partner mechanic resolved itself around this same period, in a way Chen Yu hadn't fully engineered. He had registered Chen San in the system as his first official work partner after 2 weeks of careful deliberation. The mechanic worked like this. If a registered partner was fired from their own job, and the firing reason hadn't been used in Chen Yu's recent challenge window, it counted toward his total, with the appropriate compounding reward. Chen San didn't need to know any of this. He needed only to remain what he naturally was, a person whose presence in any workplace eventually produced a memorable incident. Chen San's talent in this area was not malice. It was earnestness, operating in combination with reflexes. He'd taken a warehouse operations role at a distribution center in the North District, and things had proceeded normally for about 12 days, longer than average, actually, before an altercation between 2 other workers in the loading bay escalated past the point where Chen San's family tradition could stay inactive. No one was seriously hurt. The situation resolved quickly, largely because the shocked supervisory staff moved fast. Chen San found himself in HR shortly after lunch, accepting paperwork he had not expected to be accepting that day. He called Chen Yu from the street outside, still in the mild days that followed unexpected outcomes. Chen Yu talked him through it, said these things happened, said to come over that evening. He said it with the calm of someone processing a very pleasant notification. Dismissal challenge 16. Complete, partner. Reward, 65,536,000 yuan. He sat with that number, 65 million yuan, for an incident he had not witnessed, not arranged, and not needed to explain. Chen San arrived that evening, carrying groceries he intended to cook with, made a large and moderately chaotic meal, and described the loading bay incident across 3 expanding retellings, while Chen Yu ate and occasionally asked a question that encouraged the next version. The 3rd retelling was significantly more dramatic than the first, and Chen Yu suspected the 4th, had there been one, would have involved a light fixture. He didn't mention the 65 million. Explaining it would require explaining everything else, and he wasn't ready for that conversation yet. What he did the following week was buy Chen San a car, a Porsche specifically. It was perhaps excessive by any reasonable standard, but Chen Yu had done the math, and the math kept producing numbers that made reasonable feel like a shrinking category. Chen San stood in the parking lot looking at it for 30 seconds without speaking, which was remarkable in its own right. Then he asked if Chen Yu had done something illegal. Chen Yu said no. Chen San asked the same question with different phrasing. Chen Yu said, absolutely not. The money was legitimate. Get in the car. Chen San got in. He adjusted the seat 4 times. He pulled out of the parking lot with great care, and then, once they reached a clear stretch of road, with considerably less care and a great deal of volume. The sound of his laughing, the specific, uncomplicated loudness of it, was something Chen Yu filed away deliberately, because it was one of the things that was unambiguously good about his current situation, and he'd learned to notice those. Chu Yuan had not stopped. Yao Bingguang was now working through a more developed network of contacts to keep Chen Yu's employment options narrowing. What Chu Yuan had not accounted for was that the campaign was operating in direct reverse of its intended effect. Each bribed manager, each smoothed exit, each politely arranged restructuring, all of it registered in Chen Yu's system as a clean, legitimate dismissal, free of any complication on his end, doubling and doubling as the challenge numbers climbed. Chu Yuan was spending money to make Chen Yu wealthy, at a compounding rate. This was visible only to the people watching from outside. Chen Yu knew it, Chu Xiao did not, and Chu Yuan, coordinating the campaign from his office with the satisfaction of a man handling a problem efficiently, had no idea that the problem he was handling was growing richer every time he handled it. Chen Yu requested a meeting. The room at the Chu family's main office had a view that was designed to communicate something about the people who used it regularly. Chu Yuan was already seated. Yao Bingguang stood near the window with his hands behind his back. The two men regarded each other. Chu Yuan opened by asking what Chen Yu thought he was doing with his daughter. Chen Yu said he was getting to know her, said she was someone worth knowing, and that pursuing that wasn't something he intended to stop because it caused inconvenience elsewhere. Chu Yuan pointed out that Chen Yu had been dismissed from every position he had ever held. Chen Yu agreed this was technically accurate. Chu Yuan said a man with no stable income and no family backing had nothing of substance to offer his daughter. Chen Yu let the silence settle. Then he said he understood a father's concern and found it reasonable, said he was going to be substantially wealthy, and soon, and if Chu Yuan wanted to revisit the conversation on financial grounds, he was welcome to raise it again in a year. Chu Yuan asked where that wealth was coming from. Chen Yu said it was already arriving, and left it at that. Yao Bingguang, near the window, had the expression of someone quietly recalculating a set of assumptions. The meeting ended, without resolution in either direction. Chu Yuan watched Chen Yu leave with the look of a man who had expected to close a door, and found it heavier than anticipated. He told Yao Bingguang to keep watching. He did not stop the sabotage campaign, which meant, from Chen Yu's perspective, the money kept arriving on schedule. He drew the multiplier card on the 19th lottery spin. The prize wheel paid out every 5 completed challenges. Useful things, mostly. Immunity cards that guaranteed a challenge would register regardless of the technical details of the firing. Skill packages, occasional bonus spins. He'd deployed them strategically when a challenge's legitimacy seemed likely to be tested on a technicality. The 19th spin landed somewhere different. The display read, multiplier, 5x, next 5 challenges. He read the description again to make sure he had it correctly. For the next 5 successful dismissal challenges, the base reward would multiply 5 times over the existing compounding structure, pushing each individual payout to a ceiling, at his current accumulated rate, of roughly 320 million yuan per success. He sat in his apartment for a while after reading that. Then he ordered food, because thinking at that scale made him hungry in a way he couldn't fully account for, and ate it at the kitchen table while the numbers arranged themselves into something he could hold. 5 challenges at that rate. The total figure it produced was one he had no obvious use for yet, in practical terms, but the direction it pointed was clear. He was not going to be a man who had done well. He was going to be a man who had done something that most people would consider impossible, through a mechanism most people would consider insane. He needed 5 good targets, 5 clean dismissals. The first one of the 5 was already waiting. Liu Ying had found him, which was not how he'd planned things, but the planning adjusted. She was a businesswoman in her mid-40s who ran a financial consulting firm that, from the outside, presented as a moderately successful operation, providing investment advisory services to mid-tier corporate clients. The listing was for a senior accounts administrator. Chen Yu's extensive and varied CV of short-term financial and administrative roles made him a plausible candidate. He applied, interviewed, and was assessed by Liu Ying herself, which he noted. She was sharp. The conversation moved through his employment history, without lingering on the repeated short tenures the way most interviews did, and arrived at a specific question about his comfort with flexible operational arrangements. Chen Yu said he was highly adaptable. She offered him the job. He started the following Monday and spent his first 2 weeks learning what flexible operational arrangements meant in practice at this company. Lu Ying's firm managed investment pools, groups of individual investors whose capital was being collected, held, and theoretically grown. The documentation on these pools was thin, in very specific places that were not thin by accident. Investor agreements were structured to make accountability for returns genuinely difficult to trace. Internal tracking of where money actually moved was managed through systems Chen Yu didn't have access to, and that were never mentioned in staff meetings. By the third week, he had a clear picture. This was not a financial consulting company. It was a vehicle for collecting investor capital that would not be returned. The scale was not small. Dozens of investors, many retired, many committing savings with no secondary plan. The pattern was consistent: establish credibility through apparent early returns, funded by recycling incoming capital to pay older investors, and then, when the pool reached sufficient size, or the timing felt right, restructure the operation in ways that made the company's principals difficult to locate and the investors' money impossible to trace. Chen Yu sat with this for several days. The exposure would not simply get him fired. Done correctly, it would pull the operation apart before the exit timing arrived, and before anyone's savings disappeared. That was the actual objective, separate from the system's requirements. But Lu Ying was not a disorganized small operator making sloppy errors. She was careful, experienced, and clearly practiced at managing exactly this category of risk. A direct approach would fail. She would sense trouble early, contain it quietly, and find a way to exit him that didn't generate documentation. He needed the structure understood completely before he moved. He needed the right regulatory contact with the appetite for a case like this. And he needed, when the time came, to ensure he was fired rather than smoothly managed out, which meant the situation had to become too visible for smooth management. He started building the file. Every evening, he sat at his kitchen table with a tea he never quite finished and added to a document that was growing more detailed and more damning with each new piece. Lu Ying had been professional and cordial at every interaction. She complimented his work, brought him into slightly more internal conversations as the weeks passed. He understood this as a testing process. She was assessing whether he was trustworthy enough for the next stage of what she needed from him. He was, in fact, precisely what she needed. She just had no idea for which reasons. The next stage arrived in his 5th week, when Lu Ying called him into her office, closed the door, and offered him a promotion. The new role came with a title change, a significant pay increase, and one additional administrative responsibility that she explained in a single clean sentence. He would be listed as the legal representative of the firm's primary investment vehicle entity. Chen Yu kept his expression neutral while she explained the benefits of the arrangement. What she was describing was the oldest move in this category of fraud: install a mid-level employee as the registered legal face of the fraudulent structure, so that when the scheme eventually collapsed and investigators arrived looking for someone accountable, there was a name and a signature and an official designation pointing directly at someone who had nothing to do with designing any of it. She wanted him to be the fall guy. He thanked her for the opportunity, said he needed a couple of days to review the particulars, which was a reasonable thing to say, and bought him the time he needed. He spent those 2 days completing the file, verifying the regulatory contact, and designing the specific sequence of events that would get Lu Ying to fire him in a way that was unambiguous, public enough to document, and timed to arrive approximately 4 hours after the file reached the relevant authorities. The sequence needed to be tight. Lu Ying moved fast when she sensed a problem, and he needed to be out the door, fired, officially, on record, before she had time to arrange a quieter exit. On the 3rd day, he walked into her office and declined the promotion. He did it carefully, with a specific reason, one that was technically professional and that also, subtly but legibly, suggested he had looked at the entity's structure and understood what he was being asked to put his name on. Lu Ying looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her eyes. She told him she appreciated his candor and would think about alternative arrangements. He returned to his desk and waited. What happened over the next 18 hours was faster than he'd expected. Lu Ying made 2 phone calls he couldn't hear, and one she didn't bother to keep entirely private. By the following morning, 2 things had occurred. A preliminary review notice had landed at the correct regulatory desk, and Liu Ying called him in and told him, in terms that were polished but not warm, that his fit with the company's needs had turned out to be less ideal than initially hoped, and that his role was being discontinued. Dismissal Challenge 20, complete. Reward, 320 million yuan. 320 million yuan. He sat in a taxi with the notification sitting in his head and the number sitting in his account, and thought, not for the first time, that the universe had a very particular sense of comedic proportion. Behind him, the regulatory notice was already generating a phone call that Liu Ying was not going to enjoy. The name Ye Chengcai appeared in Chen Yu's notebook. Not the challenge notebook, a different one, smaller, with a cover worn soft at the edges. A list of things he'd meant to eventually address. Most entries had been crossed out or quietly abandoned over the years. Ye Chengcai remained, written in ink that had faded slightly, without emphasis. He had worked for Ye Chengcai at 22, first job out of school, a small trading company, exporting hardware components, unremarkable in every way, except for what happened when Chen Yu left. Ye Chengcai had simply not paid his final month's wages. No dispute, no explanation. The month existed, the work existed, the money did not appear. Chen Yu had been young enough, and financially cornered enough, that chasing it through legal channels had felt impossible. That was 4 years ago. Meinelzer? And a nom. He found Ya Chengcai through professional listings, still running the same trading company, slightly expanded, with a new office address in Foucheng's commercial district, and a profile page suggesting modest success and a desire to project more. Chen Yu read it twice. Then he booked a meeting. He drove to Foucheng on a Tuesday in a car that communicated, without requiring any particular commentary, that its owner was not in need of anything. He wore a suit that cost more than Ye Chengcai probably paid his junior staff across a full month. He'd arranged the appointment through a business contact as a potential investor interested in exploring collaborative opportunities. Yu Chengcai met him in the lobby and didn't recognize him. This was not surprising. Chen Yu had been one of perhaps 15 junior employees 4 years ago at a desk in a back office. He watched Ye Chengcai's handshake, the practiced warmth of a man greeting money, and let it land without any sign that they'd met before. They sat in Ye Chengcai's office. Tea arrived. He pitched the business with the particular energy of someone slightly overconfident about an opportunity they genuinely believed in. Chen Yu listened, asked occasional questions, demonstrating more financial sophistication than Ye Chengcai had anticipated, and watched the man recalibrate his presentation in real time. After 20 minutes, Chen Yu said he had a standard process when considering new investment partners. He mentioned a concept, derived, he said, from some reading, called a progressive commitment liquidity test. He liked potential partners to demonstrate their own confidence by participating in an escalating mutual deposit framework. He pulled out his phone and asked whether Ye Chengcai had seen the Pinduoduo withdrawal challenge making the rounds online. Ye Chengcai had not. Chen Yu described it with care. Users could withdraw accumulated shopping credits, but the final amount required sharing and invitations sent outward, and the last increment, the step right before full withdrawal, never quite arrived. The progress bar would sit at 0.1% remaining and stay there, no matter how much effort went in. It had become something of a meme, a precise demonstration of effort that could never, by design, reach its conclusion. He explained this pleasantly, as context. Then he proposed a version of it as their mutual commitment test. Both parties would transfer escalating amounts into a shared verification account, demonstrating confidence, and each round would unlock the next threshold. The final threshold would release the combined capital for the real business partnership. Ye Chengcai asked 2 questions about the mechanics, which Chen Yu answered in the patient tone of someone explaining something straightforward for the 3rd time that week. The test began. Round 1 was small, symbolic from each party. It cleared. Ye Chengcai relaxed visibly. Round 2 was larger. Chen Yu's transfer appeared on Ye Chengcai's screen within seconds. Round 3. Round 4. By round 6, Ye Chengcai was watching his account balance with the concentration of a man who had begun to sense that something was moving slightly faster than he could track it clearly. He asked when the final threshold would trigger. Chen Yu said they were close. Said the system was calibrated to test patience precisely because impatience was one of the most reliable signals of a poor investment partner. Said he had seen people walk away at step 7 when step 8 was the release point, and that those departures had taught him more about character than any background check. Yi Chengsai stayed. By round 9, the questions he asked were all versions of the same question, and Chen Yu answered each one in a way that addressed the surface without touching the growing unease beneath it. The tea had gone cold on both sides. Round 10 produced a figure that Yi Chengsai stared at without moving. Then he looked up. And something in Chen Yu's expression, not gloating, not loud, but present in a way that hadn't been there at the start of the meeting, produced a specific kind of recognition. Yi Chengsai asked, in a changed voice, whether he knew him from somewhere. Chen Yu said yes, gave the months, the position, the company name, said the final month's wages had not been paid, and quoted the exact figure from memory, because he had never forgotten it. The silence had a specific texture. Yi Chengsai's face moved through several things before arriving at outrage, not shame, genuinely outrage, and he told Chen Yu to leave, said the meeting was finished. Said this amounted to fraud, to wasted time, to something he would be making calls about, and that the relationship was terminated before it had ever properly started. He used several terms meaning dismissed, removed, and unwelcome, because fired didn't technically apply to someone who wasn't his employee, though the intent behind all of them was identical. The system registered what mattered. Dismissal challenge 21. Complete. Chen Yu stood, buttoned his jacket, thanked Yi Chengsai for the tea. He walked through the lobby and out to the car, and sat with his hands on the wheel for a while. 4 years and 1 month's wages. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't accused or confronted. He'd let the man tie himself in knots over an investment game built from anxiety, then said his own name and watched the recognition land. The feeling that settled in his chest wasn't triumph exactly. It was something quieter, a small, persistent weight that had finally lifted from a place he'd gotten used to carrying it. He started the car and drove back toward Haicheng. Chen San's romantic life, during this same stretch, moved through several phases of varied disaster, which Chen Yu monitored from a careful distance. There was a chapter involving a woman named Lu Yingying that ended in mild confusion, and a string of text messages Chen San read aloud at dinner, apparently believing Chen Yu would find them as baffling as he did. There was a period of renewed contact with someone from the village that produced one hopeful week, followed by several quiet ones. Then there was Bai Jie. She found Chen San at the gym he'd joined after the Porsche, having decided that ownership of a Porsche implied certain accompanying obligations. She was several years older than him, well-dressed, and paid him a quality of deliberate attention he was not accustomed to receiving. He arrived at Chen Yu's apartment on an evening in the 3rd week with a dazed happiness Chen Yu hadn't seen on him before. He described her in enthusiastic and fairly specific terms, said she seemed genuinely interested in him, said they'd had 3 dinners, and she'd asked a great deal about his health and his family medical history, which he interpreted as a sign of serious intent. Chen Yu filed the health and family history detail without commenting on it. What he found, after some careful research conducted separately, was not comfortable. Bai Jie had a son, 9 years old, with a kidney condition that had not responded to available treatments. She was not in a strong financial position. According to information that wasn't difficult to locate once he started looking, she was registered on a donor matching list with a profile that communicated urgency. Chen San's blood type had come up 2 weeks earlier, mentioned while he described a medical form at the gym. Chen Yu told him over a meal he'd cooked himself, which was unusual enough that Chen San went quiet before Chen Yu said a word. He explained it without embellishment. The attention was real, but its reason was not what Chen San believed. A woman in a desperate situation involving a sick child. Desperation of that kind made people do things they would not otherwise choose. Chen San was quiet for a long time, asked eventually whether Chen Yu was certain. Chen Yu said yes, more quiet. He finished his food. Then he said the boy was 9, and that wasn't the child's fault. Chen Yu agreed. Chen San asked what he was supposed to do with that knowledge. Chen Yu said the kidney was not going to happen, and that was settled. Said the rest of it, what Chen San did with the fact of a 9-year-old in a difficult situation, belonged to Chen San, and that he'd support whatever that turned out to be. What Chen San decided, over the following week, was to send an anonymous contribution to a pediatric medical support fund in the district at a figure that made Chen Yu's eyebrows move when he heard it. He ended contact with Bai Jie quietly, without confrontation, without explaining himself to her. Chen Yu said nothing about the donation, not one word. Chen-san would have found commentary embarrassing, and the silence was its own acknowledgement of what the gesture meant. They both understood this. Chen Yan left around the same time, and in a different register entirely. He'd been the second work partner, a village acquaintance, who carried large ambitions, a deep belief in his own undiscovered potential, and a talent for misreading professional situations that was almost structural in its consistency. He generated 3 partner challenge completions through genuine effort and a gift for arriving at entirely wrong conclusions at high speed. His final job departure, an accounting support role, 6 days, an incident involving a spreadsheet, a misread email chain, and an accidental broadcast to the company-wide staff list, produced a specific expression when he called Chen Yu about it. Not funny. Not even frustrated. Tired, with a quality of recognition underneath it. He said he was going home. Said the city had not worked out the way he'd imagined. Said he thought he'd been wrong about some things. Stated without further elaboration. Chen Yu met him for lunch the next day near the bus station. They ate noodles. Chen Yan talked about plans back in the village. Vague but not hopeless, centered on a greenhouse operation his family had land for. Chen Yu listened without offering his opinion on any of it. When they finished eating, he transferred money to Chen Yan's account. A starting fund, he said. No repayment necessary. Chen Yan sat holding his phone, looking at the notification without speaking. Then he said he didn't know what to say. Chen Yu told him he didn't need to say anything. Said to catch the bus. Chen Yan caught the bus. Chen Yu stood outside the station after it left, not thinking about anything in particular, then walked back to the car. He built the village house across 3 deliberate months. He'd returned to Qingfeng twice since the challenges began, and each time the village had offered the specific welcome that accompanied obvious material success arriving back where it hadn't been expected. The house he built on the family land was not extravagant by city standards, but by the standards of a small farming community, it was a complete and legible statement. Stone and local wood, well-proportioned, with a kitchen large enough to actually function in, and a greenhouse structure running along the south wall. His mother had asked for the greenhouse specifically. She used it with the methodical satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for exactly this for a long time, but was too sensible to have mentioned it. The village's social dynamics adjusted to his presence, the way such dynamics always did. Warmth, envy, and a quiet revision of several historical narratives about who had always believed in him. He found it neither surprising nor particularly interesting. He was polite to those who had been kind to his family, and more polite to those who hadn't been, because warmth costs nothing and communicates more than argument. The farm plans were broader and would take longer. A stretch of land outside the village suited an organic operation, the kind that supplied premium buyers in the cities directly, cutting out the intermediaries who consumed most of the margin in conventional agriculture. He'd spoken with a consultant and was midway through reading about soil management with the focus of someone who intended to actually understand what they were reading, not simply to have read it. He was in no hurry. He had time, the means to do things correctly, and an increasing preference for correctness over speed. Chu Yuan came to his own conclusions at his own pace, as he did with everything. The conversation that marked the shift was not a formal reconciliation. It was a second meeting, requested by Chu Yuan this time, in the same office with the same view, but with Yao Bingguang absent. Chu Yuan had clearly reviewed whatever figures he had access to regarding Chen Yu's actual financial position, and was a man who responded directly to data. He asked how much Chen Yu was worth. Chen Yu gave him an approximate figure that was accurate, and watched Chu Yuan receive it with the expression of a man quietly updating a filing system. They talked for 40 minutes. Not warmly, because Chu Yuan was not a warm man by default, but with the particular directness of 2 people who had accepted they would have to deal with each other and decided to get on with it. Chu Yuan said he had concerns about stability. Chen Yu said the stability was unlikely to change direction. Chu Yuan said he had concerns about background. Chen Yu said background was a record of where a person had been, and that his included some difficult stretches, and that those stretches had produced skills he found consistently useful. A pause settled between them. Chu Yuan said he wasn't offering anything formal. Said his assessment was ongoing. Chen Yu said that was all he was asking for. The sabotage campaign ended the following week. Not formally acknowledged, it simply stopped, the way weather changes, and the absence of interference was itself a communication. Chu Xiao noticed the change without asking about it directly. Over a dinner 3 weeks later, she said something that wasn't quite a question about whether her father had seemed different to Chen Yu recently. He said he thought the relationship was improving. She went quiet in the way of someone who had hoped for something, without letting themselves expect it. He understood what the quiet meant, and found he didn't need to say anything further. There was one thing Chu Yuan would never learn, that the money he'd spent on bribed managers and arranged restructurings had compounded, via the system's doubling mechanic, into a fortune that dwarfed what his interference had cost him. The audience watching Chen Yu's life understood this perfectly. Chu Yuan did not, and likely never would, and that gap was its own particular satisfaction. The toy factory was Challenge 22. He'd taken a position as production coordinator at a small family-owned operation in the South District that manufactured molded plastic toys, vehicles mostly, sold in bulk to discount retailers. The building smelled like heated polymer and machine oil. The conveyor tracks ran at a steady, slightly uneven rhythm that you stopped hearing after the first 2 days. Family-owned operations were either the best or worst possible employment structure. This one was the second, for one specific reason: the owner's son. Pang Xiaohu was 19, officially designated as a trainee operations manager, and in practice, spent most of his time in the upper-floor lounge with his phone, appearing on the production floor occasionally in a way that slowed work down and then sped it back up slowly after he left. His authority was informal and total, because every senior staff member understood that his father owned the building beneath their feet. Chen Yu assessed him on the first day, a person who had never experienced meaningful consequence for any decision, and had built an entire personality on that foundation. The firing scheme he was developing required patience and a specific kind of indirection. Pang Xiaohuqi had two dominant interests, both online competitive games, both the kind where a player's rank was publicly visible to everyone in their social circle. His actual skill did not match the rank he wanted, a gap he addressed through paid boosts from services that were, technically, against the platform terms. His ranked profiles were the thing his status among friends hung on. Chen Yu's approach was architectural. He was going to make Pang Xiaohui worse at both games before appearing to make him better, by offering exactly the kind of helpful advice that would accelerate a catastrophic collapse of his standings until both profiles had deteriorated so visibly that he became, among his own friend group, a documented subject of conversation. The first requirement was trust, which he built over 2 weeks by asking Pang Xiaohui the right questions and listening to the answers as if they were genuinely interesting. Pang Xiaohui found this refreshing enough that he expanded considerably. He showed Chen Yu his current rankings, explained his strategies, described the competitive scene with the authority of someone who had studied something without quite mastering it. Chen Yu expressed admiration, asked whether Pang Xiaohui had considered a specific aggressive approach to ranked play that was, in technical terms, exciting in the short term and mathematically ruinous in the medium one. Pang Xiaohui had not considered it. He was considering it now, and with enthusiasm. As of the current week, Chen Yu was 40-odd hours into the process, and roughly a third of the way toward the point where the ranked collapse would be complete enough to produce what he needed: the specific combination of humiliation and impulsive rage that would cause a factory owner's son to fire an employee he couldn't unfire, in front of enough witnesses to make the dismissal unambiguous and permanent. He was aiming for a Friday afternoon. The floor would be full. The day would have reached the hour when frustration found its most direct expression. The circumstances would make the outcome irreversible. 3 days away. The factory ran its steady rhythm around him. Molded vehicles emerged from their molds and moved along the track. Pang Xiaohui was somewhere upstairs, watching his rankings shift in exactly the direction Chen Yu had suggested. The counter stood at 22. The trillion yuan prize sat at the end of 78 more successful firings, which was a large number by any measure, and not a number Chen Yu thought about directly. He thought about the next one, and the one after that. He had a plan. The plan was working. Friday was 3 days away, and the factory floor kept moving, and somewhere above them all, a game that only he could see was ticking forward, patient and steady, towards something no one else had yet begun to imagine.